Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. So the Game of Thrones finale is this weekend, so I wanted to talk all about Aegon the Conqueror and the early history of the Targaryen family. Even houses that hate the Targaryens refer to Aegon as the greatest king that Westeros ever had. His biggest achievement to date is uniting the Seven Kingdoms, although he really only united 6 kingdoms and Dorne came into the fold later. That happened about 8 generations later. That's why Dorne's motto is unbent, unbowed, unbroken. But there's actually a lot of really cool Targaryen history between the Doom and Aegon's conquest. Real quick side note too, the actual king that signed the pact with Dorne was Baelor the First. He was known as Baelor the Blessed, the one that built this big sept, the one in King's Landing where we've seen all the weddings and the funerals. Whenever people talked about Aegon the Conqueror though, they just omitted that little fact about Dorne because they wanted to keep their heads and they didn't want to get doused in wildfire. He was such a big deal though that the Archmaesters of the Citadel changed the calendar to honor him. So when we say King Joffrey died in 299 AL, AL refers to after landing, although it's a little bit wonky. There's BC before conquest and AL after landing. Technically the conquest begun in 2 BC, so like the calendar is just a little wonky. It'd be more accurate if the AL was AC and it was after conquest. George R. Martin goes a long way to base a lot of these little facts on actual real-world history, and I'm sure there are a lot of inaccuracies in the Gregorian calendar. We will actually have to talk about false narration and the way history is remembered in A Song of Ice and Fire at some point. Martin has said that false narration exists in the series. That's like characters remembering things that are false. A really good example of that is when Tyrion keeps asking people about where his first wife is. Tywin tells him wherever whores go. Jaime feeds him a lie that she only pretended to love him. That's false narration, so whenever a character tells a story, just be wary that they might be remembering something falsely. But as much as Aegon the Conqueror is a point of origin for modern Westeros, he was not the first Targaryen dragon rider in the Seven Kingdoms. Dragonstone up over here was never completely cut off from contact with the Andals. The Valyrians colonized it about 200 years before Aegon's conquest. It became the westernmost outpost of the Valyrian freehold. They used it to make money on the shipping trade in the area. It really started out as more of a stronghold, but it's basically built on this active volcano. If you didn't know, there is an active volcano underneath Dragonstone. The only evidence of the volcano today is just steam rising from natural vents in the ground. The name of the volcano is Dragonmont, but I don't think it's ever been referred to on the show. Stannis just says that it's full of dragon glass. Of course that's going to come in handy at some point. But there's an extensive series of tunnels beneath Dragonstone, and there have been many dragons that have roosted there. Dragons just naturally like to roost near active volcanoes, which says a lot about the dragons of ancient Valyria being found around the 14 Flames. And for any tinfoil theory crafters out there, I know people are always wondering if there's a secret clutch of dragon eggs beneath Dragonstone. There is no proof of that, but it's totally possible. Historically, you would think that future Targaryen kings would have moved all existing dragon eggs to King's Landing. That's what the dragon pit was created for, to be like a giant roost for the dragons, although it was a pretty terrible one. If there are any new dragon eggs to be had on the show, logically you would think that one of Daenerys' dragons would switch genders and they would mate with each other. Dragons can do that, like they haven't explained it on the show, but in the series, dragons can switch genders. Starting with the Doom of Valyria and Aenys Targaryen, there were 5 rulers of Dragonstone before Aegon was ever born. Like I said though, they didn't do a whole lot other than make a ton of money from the ships passing by through the area, the shipping trade. And they did have dragons, but the only one that was still alive, the only one that was originally born in ancient Valyria that was still alive during Aegon's time, was Balerion the Black Dread. The 2 dragons that Aegon's sisters rode, Vhagar and Meraxes, they were hatched on Dragonstone. But the Targaryen family historically was not buddy-buddy with all the other kings of Westeros. They didn't hang out all the time. But Aegon and his sisters did visit a lot of different big places. They supposedly visited the Citadel in Old Town all the way down in the Reach. They spent time in Lannisport. I mean, they traveled all over. Aegon is the one that commissioned that giant map of the Seven Kingdoms that sits in Dragonstone that Stannis is looking at when he's still at Dragonstone. So he was preoccupied with the Seven Kingdoms in a way that his predecessors were not. And even though all the different petty kings of Westeros, were continually fighting with each other, it wasn't until things got really bad between Harren Hor, also known as Harren the Black, and Argilac Durrandon, also known as Argilac the Arrogant. Great names, I know, they sound super nice. So when Aegon was about 26, Argilac reached out to him to help him deal with Harren the Black. Harren was king of the Crown Lands, and he had started annexing all this territory and was slowly getting ready to move in on Argilac. He ruled over the area that's known as the Stormlands, although a lot of that encompassed what is now the Reach. This isn't a historical map, so all these boundaries were just a little bit different during their time. So what happened is Argilac offered Aegon his daughter's hand in marriage in a bunch of land south of this river here, like right on the border of Harren the Black's land. He wanted to create like a Targaryen dragon buffer between him and Harrenhal. Aegon saw right through it, took a hard pass on the third wife because he'd already married his two sisters, countered with the proposal that if Argilac basically gave him most of the Stormlands, part of what is the Reach over here, as well as marry his daughter to Orys Baratheon, his champion. So this is where things start to get crazy. Argilac gets super pissed at the idea of having to marry his daughter to Orys Baratheon, who he calls a bastard, and sends the hands of Aegon's messenger back in a box. Aegon is super pissed and finally says enough is enough, and after about 7 days of deliberation with his generals, declares war on the Seven Kingdoms. So he's not just responding to this grave insult, he's tired of all these petty kings being so belligerent. Why is it such an insult to call Orys Baratheon a base-born bastard? Well, it's rumored that he is the half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror. That would make Orys like the Jon Snow of the Targaryen family. So Aegon the Conqueror and Orys Baratheon are a lot like Robb Stark and Jon Snow. He eventually went on to become Aegon's hand. He became the first hand of the king, and his nickname, in a funny twist of fate, became Orys One Hand because he got his hand chopped off. Just to tie these characters even more with characters on the show. So Orys was captured in this Dornish conflict. Ransom had his sword hand chopped off, just like Jaime Lannister. His son, Orys' son, was named Davos, and they fought alongside Savage Samwell Tarly. That all happened after the War of Conquest, but I love how those names make you think about characters that are on the show right now. So that was like the beginning of House Baratheon. Like once they conquered the Stormlands, he gave them to Orys Baratheon, which is funny when you think about the modern day animosity between House Baratheon and House Targaryen. So houses that once used to be really friendly, like, say Starks and Lannisters, hundreds of years later might be bitter enemies. The same is true for all the other great houses of Westeros. So let's pull out the map here. So Aegon lands at the area that is now known as King's Landing, you guessed it. The first places that he takes are the Stormlands and the Crownlands. That's when you had the famous burning of Harrenhal. That's why it looks all melty, because one of his dragons melted it. Then he moves his army southwest, takes the Reach. Then King Torrhen bends the knee. There was even an inn built on the spot where he kneeled, called the Inn of the Kneeling Man. It showed up a couple times during Book 2. Arya gets taken there by the Brotherhood Without Banners, and Jaime and Brienne stayed there briefly after she first started her mission to take Jaime back to King's Landing. So then Aegon marches on the Vale, Dorne, and Old Town. Dorne, obviously, as I mentioned, was a total wash, but after he marched into Old Town, a conqueror, he was crowned ruler of the Six Kingdoms inside the Starry Sept and given a new crown. The old crown that he wore was just this simple circlet of Valyrian steel. The books only talk about that first crown, so it's possible that new crown that he got, he only wore like that one time. Future Targaryen kings always modified their crowns to their own preference. Really, like the biggest artifact that got passed down generation to generation unchanged was the Valyrian sword Blackfire. Some of you guys have actually asked me to do a video on like where all the special Valyrian blades are. Most of them still exist. I mean, they haven't been sucked into a black hole or anything. But the funny thing when you think about it is before the Doom, Valyrian swords were super common. Like anybody that was a member of the Freehold probably could have commissioned their own Valyrian blade. It would be really cool if Varys and Illyrio tracked down Blackfire to give to Daenerys before she marched on Westeros. Don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I'm just saying it'd be pretty badass. The blades that Aegon melted down into the Iron Throne, there were actually about 1,000 of them, were from all the conquered people, the people that didn't bend the knee. This is what it actually looked like. It took almost 100 people, 59 days of like beating metal and Balerian's dragonfire to reshape all those blades into the chair. The rumor is that the rulers that bent the knee, like Torrhen Stark, didn't get their blades melted down, so supposedly there is no Stark blade in the Iron Throne. Aegon died when he was about 64 years old, and unfortunately, as is true with real-world history, a lot of his successors ended up being pretty weak. It's like when your dad is that successful, unless your name is Daenerys and you have 3 dragons, there's no way you're going to top conquering Westeros. Daenerys does have a lot of visual and metaphorical parallels with Aegon the Conqueror, but Martin isn't overly simplistic on the way that history repeats itself. I mean, we'll have to see how the show deals with Daenerys' army in seasons 6 and 7, but Dan and Dave are really good about including little Easter eggs from the side stories too, like the Dance of the Dragons. That's not something that's overly explained in the main novels. You have to read like the side story for that. Here's my big question for you guys. Do you feel like Daenerys' story will play out in a very similar way to Aegon the Conqueror's story? Do you feel like Martin wants us to feel like they're almost the same person, like she's the second coming? I don't want to make any Christ analogies or anything like that. There are definitely characters that are just as important as Daenerys on the show, but she feels very much like Aegon the Conqueror. The really cool thing is that Martin is actually going to write a book about the history of the Targaryen family, just called Fire and Blood, but it's not going to happen until after he finishes A Song of Ice and Fire, which is probably going to be like 6 years away. So really big reminder, the finale is tonight. I'll post my video after the episode airs. Be sure to subscribe to get it. I'm also giving away a signed copy of A Feast for Crows. What I'll probably do is I'll do my Season 6 predictions on Monday before I do my Q&A. And then the bonus videos that I do after that will just be dictated on whatever WTFs happen in the finale. So just be sure to check out those videos whenever they post. There'll be some extra giveaways going on too. So while you guys are all waiting for that to drop, you can click here for my episode video, and you can click here to learn all about the Night King and Azor Ahai. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. We're almost there. Almost time for the finale.